I remember the first time the city felt strange, almost alien. Paris under occupation was not the Paris of old laughter and sunlight glinting off cafe tables. The air had thickened, every footstep weighed down by worry. I watched as bakeries, once cheerful and aromatic, became grim fortresses where lines curled onto the sidewalk and you could taste the desperation long before you bit into a piece of bread, if you ever got one. My neighbor, Claire, was just like me. Another woman trying to stretch every franc, patch up endless gaps in the week, and shield her loved ones from the slow creep of scarcity. Before the war, Claire's world had been humble but predictable. She worked odd jobs, was known for sewing a sturdy seam or finding whatever someone needed for a few coins. It was never easy, but it was manageable, an existence where there was always just enough. Then everything shifted. The streets grew quieter, work dried up, and bills piled higher with each day the news only got worse. There were evenings I'd see her pause under the flickering lamp by our building, holding an envelope she couldn't bring herself to open, eyes tracing the cracks in the sidewalk as if the earth might reveal an answer. The part that haunted me was this: Claire wasn't lazy. She wasn't reckless or wasteful. Her story didn't fit the tired cliches people like to quote about poverty. She wanted to work. She wanted to pay what she owed. But the more overdue letters arrived, the more the shame grew, thick and sticky, threatening to squeeze her voice right out of her throat. The thought of asking anyone for help, me, her sister, a neighbor, was almost as unbearable as the cold drafts blowing through her empty fridge. Then, all at once, Paris wasn't just broke, it was rationed. Lines snaked around the block for half portions of flour. Neighbors traded the time of day for rumors of where you might find eggs, or soap, or a few precious lumps of sugar. That's when I realized the real currency had changed. The value of money, paper, coins, shrank while power shifted into something subtler, something measured in whispers and favors. I saw Claire standing in the thin morning fog, waiting for her number to be called, until she understood what nobody ever teaches us, that when survival is on the line, organization and resourcefulness become more valuable than gold. Claire began walking little packages across the city, at first for close friends, then for friends of friends. She memorized routes, remembered who was likely to be watching and who would quietly look the other way. Only later did I realize the risk she carried in her threadbare coat, how every alley she crossed could have changed her story for good or ill. The irony was sharp. She earned more in barter and favors than she ever had with her old jobs, and with each new exchange, her web of connections grew. But so did the danger. So did the tension of being looked to as a provider, while never quite sure if the next knock would bring a desperate family or the authorities. It struck me, watching her navigate all this, that the real war wasn't always outside our doors. It played out quietly inside our kitchens and restless dreams. Sometimes the enemy looked like an overdue bill, sometimes like the sound of a hungry child, sometimes like your own reflection reminding you there was no backup plan, no cushion for when things went wrong. Claire survived because she learned to see beyond the numbers, to weigh risks, to prioritize, to build a system in the chaos. Her story echoed my own fears and failures, the pile of unopened bills, the dread of asking for terms, the guilt of not being good with money, while life spun further out of control. If you've ever felt that same tightness in your chest as the month outpaces your wallet, or stared at debts mounting while you pray for a lifeline, you already know this battle. It isn't just about money. It's about dignity, agency, and the aching hope that, given half a chance, we might turn survival into something more. Watch with me as we walk through Claire's war, and perhaps together, we'll uncover not just how to endure tough times, but how to forge from them the strategies and courage that can carry us, no matter what the world tries to take away. I remember the first time I noticed how money wasn't only about francs or pieces of silver slipped across counters. The roots went much deeper. That morning, I watched Claire talk with her mother at the kitchen table, voices low. Her mother's hands, creased with age, fidgeted with a button as if the object might anchor her in a sea of uncertainty. As I lingered in the hallway, I realized these conversations had a strange, heavy rhythm. They weren't simply about what to buy, but were weighed down by unspoken rules, hushed arguments about what yielded value, what was wasteful, who should sacrifice, and who deserved a little more warmth or sweetness in their tea. It struck me that I wasn't merely witnessing a debate over budget. Tracing these reflections through my own life, I began to recognize the invisible hand shaping my comfort with risk, my suspicion of asking anyone for assistance, my guilt for longing towards something brighter. Nestled behind these walls, I also heard stories in hushed tones about neighbors who had never known hardship, who handled money like it was meant to flow in and out without shame or surveillance. The contrast invited curiosity and even a touch of envy. How could some people face the same harsh winter, the same shortages, and yet move with a sense of possibility I struggled to summon? As I observed them, I started to see patterns, how one's sense of worth, formed early and deep, determined boundaries for what was imaginable. That boundary became a second threshold, more limiting than any locked door or empty cupboard. Before I ever held a bill in my hand, I'd absorbed the lessons hovering in the margins. Money meant stability, but longing for more invited judgment. Self-sufficiency earned respect, but too much ambition drew whispers. Each day brought fresh evidence of how beliefs tunneled beneath our plans. I listened to Elodie, the seamstress across the hall, share how her grandmother once kept a stash of sugar cubes as insurance against hungry years. That ritual carried forward in Elodie's meticulous saving, her avoidance of the market unless absolutely necessary. She confessed, "We don't throw away the wrapping paper here. Nobody knows when you'll get more." Those stories, those inherited precautions, didn't just guard against scarcity, they anchored her sense of control. I recognized the sensation, that quiet pulse beneath decision-making, urging caution or igniting dread whenever an unexpected expense appeared. Beyond family teachings, I faced the persistent narrative woven through our entire street. The rumor that people like us would never rise past modest means, that the world wouldn't wait for dreamers or the unlucky. It was a script delivered not just by words, but by how jobs were doled out, who received trust, who got second chances. When I looked back at my own choices, I saw that my ceiling hadn't always been carved by circumstance, but by these subtle messages, these repeated limits that molded my expectations before I found the courage to argue with them. Bringing that realization into focus, I started questioning whose voice echoed at moments of fear. Was it really my own? Or had I borrowed anxieties from childhood warnings, neighborhood gossip, even the fearful tightness in my father's jaw when he balanced the week's receipts? Facing those questions wasn't comfortable, but it unearthed powerful truths. What we inherit isn't just a ledger. It's a collection of permissions and prohibitions, a guide on what's acceptable to hope for, or what's dangerous to reach toward. Realizing that, I understood why changing money habits isn't just about arithmetic. It's about challenging the inheritance hiding in plain sight and choosing which stories continue on in us. One chilly morning, I found myself moving briskly through a back alley, my coat cinched tight and my mind alert. The city seemed woven with secrets. Conversations murmured behind shutters, eyes narrowing over steaming cups of chicory coffee. Contradictions filled the air, hunger with the scent of potatoes frying 2 floors down, laughter at a market stall masking calculations over every crumb. That day, I bumped into Marcel, a wiry man with the posture of someone who dodged trouble more than once. He sidled up to me, brandishing a small packet of soap as if it were gemstones. "You'd be surprised how much folks will swap for this," he whispered. The old rules had faded into obscurity. Now, showering was a rare luxury, and people traded with crisp precision. 2 spoonfuls of sugar for a candle, 3 eggs for a bolt of cloth. In those moments, a new world revealed itself. One where the ledger no longer lived in bank books or wage slips, but in our capacity to read a room, to sense a need before it was voiced. I learned to listen differently, to parse each gesture, to weigh risks with more than mere arithmetic. We became expert negotiators, crafting unwritten pacts over scraps of coffee grounds or the precious smoothness of butter wrapped in wax paper. One evening, as rain tapped code on the tin roof and cold seeped beneath the door, I found myself trading a hand-knitted scarf for a sack of dried beans, my fingers trembling not from the chill, but from the gravity of the exchange. The stakes climbed with every arrangement. Behind closed doors, alliances grew, and so did rivalries. Trust was a currency, as volatile as anything. Beyond mere transactions, these deals altered our very posture in the city. I sensed Adrian, the butcher's sister, appraising me differently after I passed her a length of good cotton in exchange for a few coveted bones. Our eyes locked, each of us silently calculating what favors the other might call in, an invisible give and take that bound us even as it unsettled our nights. Inside every jar of honey or handful of dried peas passed a story of ingenuity, calculated risk, and silent agreement. While others relished windfall trades, I felt the weight each time. If I pressed too hard, I could lose a vital contact. Go too soft, and I might find my own cupboards bare before the month ended. Navigating this intricate landscape, I realized survival depended not only on resourcefulness but on restraint. Greed had its price. I saw Pierre, once a clever middleman, grow careless as he boasted of his latest windfall to the wrong person, and watched him vanish, his former customers knocking on doors for news. The lesson burned brighter than any candle. You had to know not just what to obtain, but how to steward your growing influence. As each day passed, networks knotted tighter, reputations soared or plummeted by nightfall. Alongside this, something unexpected took root in me, a sense of structure, a deliberate choreography to the chaos. I studied patterns, which homes swapped bread on Tuesdays, whose lantern burned late into the night, signaling it was safe to approach. Each circuit sharpened my instincts. With every transaction, my confidence swelled, not in the old sense of security, but in an ability to flex and adapt. One afternoon, as I wrapped salt and brown paper for Genevieve, who nursed a sick child next door, she gripped my hand and whispered, "You keep us going." In her words, I understood fully. What we were building was far greater than profit or relief. Our clandestine market wasn't just survival. We became the city's veins, carrying hope and sustenance where it was needed most. Reflecting on these lessons, I now see how adaptability and connection eclipsed the chase for coins. Real wealth emerged from our willingness to reassess values, nurture relationships, and protect not only our own, but each other's futures. As night fell and silence returned to my apartment, I marveled at this paradox. Even while we feared scarcity, we forged abundance through every smart, compassionate trade. Our city was changed, and so were we. Evening pressed in, ink dark and cold, long after most lights had sputtered out in